Friends, welcome to my channel. Don't forget to like and subscribe. It's not difficult for you, but it's nice for me, and we're starting. I'm sitting on the couch, looking at the soft light of the fireplace, a glass of eggnog in my hand. It's Christmas Eve, and in the background I can hear my wife humming a Christmas carol in harmony with the soft melodies coming from the stereo as she lays out Santa's presents. Although our children have grown up, we still have Santa Claus on Christmas morning. Only gifts, instead of dolls and toys, are sweaters and dresses, movies and CDs. But they are still given with the love they used to expect from us. I look at her, and, as often happens, at the same moment she looks back at me. Our eyes meet, and we smile at each other with an air of eternal love. I remember the previous Christmas Eve many years ago, and the one 2 years before that, when a series of circumstances, successful and unsuccessful, led to Grace becoming my lover, and soon after that, my wife. They say that sometimes you have to go through hell to get to heaven, and that was true in my case. I've been through hell that I wouldn't wish on anyone, but if there wasn't hell, I wouldn't have Grace, and I wouldn't be half the person I am today. Let me tell you my story, because there are some lessons to be learned from it. As far as I know, there was only one perfect person in the history of the world, and even he was not just a man. Therefore, it is quite logical that each of us at some point in our lives did something bad, something that hurt another person. We have all done something that should have earned our condemnation, at least from higher powers, and it is only thanks to grace that we do not pay for our often stupid decisions. In my case, I took a man who was straight or at least didn't use illegal substances and set him on a bad path. Maybe it wouldn't have been so bad, but soon after that she got pregnant with my child. We got married, and eventually in 4 years she gave birth to 3 children for me, 2 daughters and a son. It wasn't until we were married for almost 8 years that I realized what she had become behind my back and under my nose, and I needed most of my money and all my self-respect before I finally got rid of her. And even then, she left me with scars, physical and emotional, scars that I still carry. My name is Steve Moreland. I'm 42 years old, and I'm much wiser than I was when I was 15. I was born and raised in a suburban area near a mid-southern city. My ancestors were quite well off, and I tried my best to be cool. Although I was on the football team throughout high school, I didn't play much, mostly on special teams and junior teams. You'd think that when my good friend was murdered in his senior year of high school, it made some of us think, and in my case, it happened for a while. I was on the rise after the incident when I started dating Eliza. We were in the same class, and she clung to me as someone who needed it. It didn't matter that she already had a boyfriend who was a year older and went to a nearby junior college. We started dating, and soon she left him for me. It should have been alarming, but I was so careless in love that I didn't pay attention to it. At that time, Eliza was kind of a nerd, but she was a nerd who, as they say, gave her all. She was slightly above average height, quite pleasant in appearance with a body in which all the parts were located in the right places and in the right proportions. She was always a little shy about her nose, which was a little crooked, although it did not spoil her appearance at all, and she had soft brown hair, completely unremarkable. For the most part, she was a sweet girl, the youngest child of a truck driver and a schoolteacher. But there were a few people who didn't like her, and one of them was my father. Even before she got involved with illegal substances, Eliza was very moody at times, and when she was in a bad mood, she could be a bitch. But that was okay, because when I was in a bad mood, I could be pretty rude too. Even my mother, who liked her and sympathized with her, understood the pitfalls that 2 people like us could face. I also think that my father felt that there were demons lurking in her soul that could consume me if they were released. Plus, he believed that I could find a much better match. But I was in love, and besides, he also supposedly married a girl below his station, and my mother turned out to be a real princess. The first day of my return from college fell on Tuesday morning. Eliza's parents were at work, and she met me at the door, still wearing her thin nightgown. We hadn't been together for months, and we were hot and horny, but I persuaded her to get dressed and take a ride with me. We had a very nice parking spot that we had used before, and I drove us there. We parked and I took out a thick cigarette. She looked at me with disapproval, but I think she was always a little curious, judging by the way I talked about it in a roundabout way, so she agreed to try. She giggled, and then attacked me with a passion I had never seen in her before. I mean, we've made love before, but it always seemed like something was holding her back. But not this time. She kissed me wildly, and in a few seconds we were furiously tearing each other's clothes. I didn't think about protection because she always took pills for a year after our first intimacy. I didn't think about anything except how well she was feeling. Elise gasped, moaned and screamed. I wheezed and gasped, fighting for control, trying to prolong the delicious agony of our bond. Up and down, up and down. We worked faster and harder until Eliza breathed loudly, then arched her back, raised her head to the sky, and exploded in a truly amazing moment. We were covered in sweat and laughing madly, slowly recovering from such an incredible high. I quickly realized that the herb had the same effect on Eliza as it had on me. She became insatiably horny, and we made love at every opportunity all weekend until I left that Sunday. We spent the entire Christmas holidays doing almost the same thing, although it was not easy to find time and place for love. I returned to college for the spring semester about a month later when Eliza called me and burst into tears. She had a delayed period. She calmly went to the clinic, and the doctor confirmed her worst fears. She was pregnant. Although neither of us was very religious at the time, we did not believe in abortion and, after talking about it, decided to get married. Needless to say, both parents were unhappy, and my father in particular begged me not to do it. But I felt that it was a courageous and noble act, and in May 1983 we got married. Much later, after the birth of our daughter Mary, I calculated the time, and Eliza must have conceived around Christmas. I ended up doing the same thing with 2 other kids. With a wife and family to support, college was no longer an option, and I got a job at a pharmacy as a storekeeper and sometimes as a cashier. I would not have been able to get this job under the same circumstances today because I would never have passed a test for banned substances. But checking wasn't standard practice back then, and I soon showed a penchant for this job. 2 years later, I was promoted to assistant store manager at another branch in the city, and in 1985, Eliza gave me a son, Robert. Just a year later, our second baby girl, Allison, was born. After that, Eliza's tubes were bandaged, and we started raising our family. We had a lot of fun throughout this period, but nothing too wild. Let me emphasize that I loved her throughout this time, even if there were problems at times in the house. In the fall of 1989, when Allison was 3 years old and Robert was 4, Eliza decided to return to work and got a job as a secretary in a modest company engaged in the supply of electricity. At first, I didn't mind, because it meant additional income, which was necessary for us to support a growing family. But then I started getting to know the people she worked with, and I got bad feelings, especially from the men who worked there. They were constantly fighting and constantly hitting on each other. Mitch was mostly normal. Unless he got hooked on whiskey, then he could become a real horror. So I didn't get too close to him. But Eliza and Glenda quickly became friends, and we spent a lot of time at their house. For the first time, I really thought that something was going on with Eliza on New Year's Eve. We went to a big party at Mitch and Glenda's, and it was a regular end-of-year party, lots of beer and lots of smoke. I haven't used weed for about 6 weeks now, so it hit me hard. However, I was fine until midnight, when the champagne started pouring. I drank most of the bottle in addition to a dozen or so beers, and I felt sick like a dog. I remember sitting on the roadway in a drunken stupor, and that night it was cold outside. Eliza finally found me after I threw up all my guts, brought me into the house and put me on the bed, where I passed out. I had been lying there for probably a couple of hours when one of their teenage daughters kicked me out of her room. I staggered into the room, looking for my wife, but she was nowhere to be seen. I thought I heard the muffled sounds of love from one of the back bedrooms, but I was too drunk to do anything. The next thing I remember was in the morning. I was lying on the floor in their room, and Eliza was sleeping on the couch. After that night, I swore that I would never do anything like this again. I had a good career, and I felt that there was a tendency in society to refuse to take recreational illegal substances. It was the era of just say no, when stories began to spread about the pitfalls of illegal use of prohibited substances. I really thought Eliza was in this with me, but then it became clear to me that she had just stopped using at home. The first real sign that the situation is changing appeared in the spring. One day Eliza went to get a haircut and came back blonde. I also noticed that she was losing the weight she gained after having children, although I did not see her following any diet or exercise program that could lead to weight loss. Along with the weight loss and the new hair color, which I didn't like. She began to wear a new, more revealing wardrobe. When I finally complained about it, she just shrugged and said she wanted to look good. At work, something didn't add up. When spring turned into summer, she started meeting girls a couple of times a week after work and began to come later and later. After many night outings, she tried to slip into the house unnoticed, lock herself in the bathroom, and take a shower. And because she left and returned late at night, our lives simply ceased to exist. It bothered me at the time. Later, I will be glad that it happened. It was in the middle of July, when she came home around 2 in the morning, and I was watching her, pretending to be asleep. It was the first concrete sign that made me suspect that she was cheating on me. I asked her about it the next morning, and she looked me straight in the eye and said she wasn't cheating. "Of course I'm not having an affair," she said indignantly. "And yours?" "Not even close," I replied. But her behavior spoke volumes. She took offense and turned my suspicions into her suspicions. I knew that I remained faithful, although I was periodically offered to make love by some girls who worked under me. I knew it was bad practice and avoided such meetings. It's not that I was so virtuous that I wouldn't use another woman out of wedlock if I had the opportunity. It had more to do with my character. I have never been gifted with the gift of talkativeness and have not learned how to have a conversation with strange women. With Eliza, I was in my comfort zone, and it would be difficult for me to take a step forward in relationships with other women. At home, our relationship to each other was hot and cold, but over time, the connection between us became more and more lost. Our life turned into a joke, and we no longer had the playfulness that we used to have in marriage. And again, she brought it down on me, unequivocally stating that she was old enough to do what she wanted, that I had put her on this path, and if I didn't want to have fun with her, then she would find someone who wanted it. Around the end of September, I made a desperate attempt to save our relationship. I caught Eliza on a day off, asked her to sit down, and we talked. I asked her if she still loved me and if she still wanted to be married to me. She looked at me with tears in her eyes and said she loved me. "Okay, then I have a few conditions," I said. "I want you to quit this job and find something else. I would also like you to go through a rehabilitation program, and we need to meet with a marriage counselor. I'm ready to start over from scratch, but only if you're willing to meet me halfway." "I don't know, Steve," she said. "I earn good money there, and I like working there. They treat me well, and I definitely won't go to any rehab clinic. I understand if you don't want to do this anymore, but I'm not ready to quit." She agreed to meet with a psychologist. We went twice. Then she decided that it was a waste of time and money, which we do not have, and stopped going. And the pattern behavior resumed. I started following her, going to the bars where she went after work. She drank with a mixed group of men and women, and some of the places she went to were pretty dirty. I never stayed long enough to check if she had gone to a motel or somewhere else, because I had to go home to take care of the kids. But a couple of times, I saw her go to the back of the bar, to the toilets, and stay there much longer than I thought was necessary for her to do what women do in the ladies' room. By December, I had enough circumstantial evidence, and I was ready to take the next step and get concrete evidence. By that time, our marriage had become a laughing stock. We were constantly fighting. She came home late from work almost every night and looked like she had been ridden and was sweating. I was fed up with Eliza and what I saw in her lies and infidelity. Moreover, she shied away from the role of a mother, spending all her time at parties. I did most of the parenting because she didn't have time for them, and don't think they didn't notice it. I needed to know what she was doing in order to plan her next steps. Is there any hope of saving our marriage, or is it time to divorce? To begin with, I did 3 things. First, I went to my doctor, ostensibly for an examination, and there I asked for a blood test. I wanted to establish 2 things. First, that I do not have any sexually transmitted diseases, and secondly, I wanted to show that I am now free from prohibited substances. Then I quietly took samples from all 3 of our children and sent them to a DNA lab in another state. I wanted to get solid proof that I am or am not the father of my children. DNA analysis wasn't as complicated then as it is now, but it was advanced enough to tell me if I was really the father of the children I was raising. I didn't think it would change anything in my feelings for them. I was their dad, regardless of whether I was really their father, but from a legal point of view, I had to know it anyway. If we get divorced, I will claim custody, and my chances would be much higher if I were their biological father. Eventually, I asked around and found out the name of the best divorce lawyer in town, and then went to him. I stated my concerns, and he agreed to take me on as a client and referred me to his private investigator. Lily Spradling was a smart woman in her 40s who, as I soon found out, knew everyone in town and everything about everyone. I told her what I wanted, and she took over my case. It was already starting to cost me dearly, and I still didn't know anything specific. Everything was decided on Christmas Eve. In her company, it was customary to close the store around 1 o'clock on Christmas Eve and invite all employees to a big party in the warehouse. I thought Eliza would have fun for a couple of hours, then come home so we could do the last shopping, and then prepare Santa's things for the kids to wait for when they get up at dawn on Christmas Day. But 6 hours passed, and Eliza was still missing. Then 9 hours passed, and there was no news from her. I started calling all the places I could think of Glenda, who also had no money, prisons, hospitals, but she was nowhere to be found. I was beside myself. Didn't she even have the decency to restrain her antics on Christmas Eve? I was still waiting for her when, around 10:30, I heard the car door slam and saw my wife stumbling up the path to the house. I stared at her, and she looked away, and then something inside me just collapsed. At that moment, I was just too tired to fight her. Besides, I'm going to have a video recording of her whole day soon, because I had a feeling she was going to do something like that, and so I asked Lily to set up surveillance. By then, Lily had found out that Eliza had been identified as a woman who frequented a motel in a troubled part of town in the company of several suspicious individuals. Lily bribed the clerk at the motel, and she was allowed to install a hidden camera in one of the rooms, provided that if Eliza showed up, she and those with whom she was would be directed to this room. Eliza and I spent a busy Christmas day circling each other while I waited for the shit to hit the fan. It was the calm before the storm. I knew Eliza wasn't working for the next week. They always closed for the week between Christmas and New Year, so I wasn't too worried about what she would do. The day after Christmas, Lily called me at the store, and her voice sounded very urgent. "You need to come see the recording you made the other day," she said. "How bad is it?" I said. "Worse than you can imagine," she said. I guessed that Eliza had a boyfriend, maybe two, but I was completely unprepared for what I saw on Lily's surveillance footage. Lily sat me down in the empty office of one of her assistants, connected the tape to the VCR, and left me alone to digest what was on the tape. Before she started recording, she gave me a surveillance report that described Eliza's behavior before she arrived at the motel. That was all the evidence I needed, because it was pretty clear in itself. I do not know how Lily did it, but she somehow dragged her assistant to a company party, and he witnessed what was happening. It all started out as an ordinary party, lots of booze, a few kisses under the mistletoe. Nothing too dramatic. However, an hour later, the Christmas carols that were playing from the tape recorder were replaced by dance music, and Eliza was seen dancing dirty dances with several people, including her friend Glenda. According to the report, Eliza and Glenda practically made love in the middle of the room, while the men present surrounded them and cheered them on. Then everything went smoothly. Eliza was spotted heading to the parking lot in the company of some guy. A private detective took over the post to see what they were doing. When they finished, he saw that Eliza's head had sunk into the man's lap, and the man had thrown his head back with an expression of pleasure on his face. After a few minutes, Eliza's head came up again, and she was wiping something from her mouth, smiling slyly. Then they returned to the party. Around 5 o'clock, the party ended, but instead of driving home, Eliza followed several pickups to the motel where she had been seen earlier, and that's where the recording began. My future ex-wife, entered the room in the company of 4 guys whom I would describe as jocks. They were all about 6 feet tall and well-built, and a couple of them were even quite good-looking if you like men with slightly rough features. 3 joints were lit and went around in a circle, while one of the men sat down at the table and began to cook several thick lines of coke. As the room filled with smoke, everyone, including Elise, sucked a line into each nostril, and she giggled seductively as she sucked in hers. I saw enough, and I rewound the tape just to realize how bad it was, and it got even worse. By that time, however, I was already numb from shock, so when she accepted all 4 of them at once, it no longer made any impression on me. I guess the look on my face said a lot, because Lily asked her assistant, the one who was watching Eliza at the party, to take me to the nearest bar to drink something therapeutic. After a couple of beers with Burl short for Burlington, I felt a little better. We talked about what I was planning to do, and he agreed to help me when it was time to hand Eliza the divorce papers. He was a big, muscular guy, but he was a sweetheart inside, and he was very sympathetic to me. Burl went through the same thing I went through, and he understood what I had to go through. When I returned home that evening, all I could do was try to be polite to Eliza. Fortunately, I think she made it easier for me by dressing up and going out with her friends. I didn't even bother to watch her leave. I was playing with Allison in the living room when she left. The next morning, I went to my lawyer and told him that I was ready to submit the documents. I wanted them to be ready for the new year, and I wanted Burl to be the one to serve her. I had a New Year's surprise for my wife. On New Year's Eve, I told Eliza that I would have to work until closing at 9 p.m. and that I would prefer to just spend a quiet night at home. I begged her to stay at home with me, knowing full well that she would not do anything that I expected. As always, she was planning to go to Glinda and Mitch's New Year's Eve party, and she just laughed at what she thought was my pathetic attempt to get her to stay at home. "If you want to be a bore, then go ahead," she said. "But I want to have fun at the party. Can't you stay at least a little while to babysit until I get home from work?" I said, "Why?" She chuckled. "Why should I let these little goats stop me from having fun? If you can't get away from this store, then I'll hire a babysitter to guard your precious babies." I was stunned. I knew she had lost interest in raising children, but the way she spoke coldly about them just amazed me. What happened afterwards was hard to imagine. "It's all right, Eliza," I said slowly. "I'll arrange everything. You won't have to put your hands on your children one iota." I called the neighbor's teenage daughter, who was a regular babysitter for our children, and asked her to spend about an hour with the children for an hour. She agreed, and I told her to call me at the store as soon as Eliza left the house. A little after 6:30, the girl called, and I handed the store over to my assistant. I called my brother, who agreed to meet me at the house to help pack Eliza's things. His wife brought him and left with my children, who were told they would spend the night with their grandparents. We packed all of Eliza's things and moved them in my pickup truck to the storage room, and then a little after 10 o'clock we drove to Mitch and Glinda. Burl was sitting in his car in a safe place and watching the house. "She didn't leave," Burl said. "It's safe to say that she stayed there overnight." "Okay," I said as he poured me coffee from the thermos he had with him. We watched the house, saw several people coming and going until it was midnight. When the sounds of fireworks and other festive events rang out around us, the three of us got out of the car and approached the house. At first, no one opened the door, probably because they couldn't hear over the roar. But Burl started banging on the door, and finally someone I didn't know opened the door. "Eliza Moreland?" Burl shouted as we entered the foyer. It took several minutes before someone could bring her to the door, and she looked terribly disheveled when she appeared. "Yes, what?" she began, then saw me and my brother standing on either side of Burl, and I think our faces told her that we weren't here to join the party. "What are you?" she began again, but Burl interrupted her. "Eliza Moreland," he said, putting one of the letters he had with him into her hand. "You have been served. This is a petition filed in civil court by Mr. Steve Moreland demanding a divorce on the grounds of adultery and mental cruelty. And this is an injunction prohibiting you from approaching within 1,500 feet of the house that you and your husband previously occupied. And in this envelope is the key and the address of the warehouse where your belongings were transported." "You're a pathetic person," Eliza hissed, and I saw Mitch, Glinda, and all their friends begin to gather behind her. "I gave you a chance, Eliza," I said calmly. "I gave you a chance to clean yourself up, and you chose to shit on me. You've made your bed. Now get in it." I doubt Burl would have used his gun, but he was a very effective peacemaker. Then I went to my parents to spend what was left of New Year's Eve and gird my loins for the upcoming battle. It didn't take long. The truth is, Eliza started messing with her own shit from the very beginning, and that was the beginning of a year of hell. While we were packing her things, I hired a locksmith to come to our house and change the locks, but that didn't stop Eliza. When we celebrated the new year at my parents' house, she broke the window in the kitchen door to get into the house and apparently searched our bedroom. Maybe she was looking for something. I'm not sure. It didn't matter. I called the police and charged her with breaking and entering. Since this was her first arrest, and since it was done in connection with the fact that I had served her the night before, her lawyer was able to drop the charges. A week later, I received the results of a blood test from the doctor and breathed a sigh of relief when all the results turned out to be negative. I added these documents to my growing evidence file, and the following week I received another piece of good news. The results of the DNA analysis showed that all 3 children are really mine. Whatever Eliza was doing behind my back, she started doing it after the children were born. It simplified my strategy. I sought full custody of the children and only allowed Eliza supervised visits. To my bewilderment, she struggled with all her might. I would have thought that, judging by the way she behaved, she would be glad to be free, that she would not have a husband and family holding her back from doing what she so wants. But I didn't think about the demons my father had seen in her heart all these years. Once I became an enemy in her eyes, she couldn't let me win without a fight. But the more she tried to fight me, the worse it got for her, and the more angry she got at me. It took until the middle of summer, but I finally got the divorce I was seeking. Then we went to the family court for custody, and she used what she thought was her heavy artillery, the fact that I was the person who introduced her to illegal substances. But my lawyer provided evidence that I was free of banned substances, and had been for at least most of the year. It seemed like I was going to get full custody when Eliza finally went too far. It was a hot September night, and I was just leaving the store. The only warning was the sudden shuffling of several pairs of feet. Then I felt something, a large stick or maybe a baseball bat, hit me hard right in the ribs. I only managed to roll away from a blow aimed at my head, but which hit my shoulder. I managed to get on my knees and defend myself, and I saw that I was being attacked by 3 attackers, 2 of whom I recognized from the recording of Eliza's group sex on Christmas Eve. I managed to grab the guy with the club so that he couldn't really hit me, and I managed to land a few hard punches in the guy's stomach area. But the downside was that I was left open to being attacked by the fists and feet of the other 2. I do not know if they would have killed me or not, but I vaguely heard voices coming from the street, and I lay in a lump of pain. The last thing I remember was some black guy hovering over me, asking if I was okay, and then calling for someone to help. Literally, the next thing I saw was a face, a woman's face. At first it was kind of unclear, but when my head started to clear, I saw that it was a nurse, and a very beautiful one at that. She had a pretty thin face, but she smiled when she saw me coming to, and when she did, her whole face lit up. That's how I met Grace Pauling. I stayed in the hospital for 3 weeks, during which time I got to know Grace very well. She was just the most beautiful woman I've ever seen. She was aptly named because she had a kind of grace, an elegance that comes from inner peace. She was slightly above average height and rather slender, with soft blonde hair cut in a fashionable way just below her shoulders. She had almost flat breasts, but if that bothered her, she didn't show it, and it never bothered me. From the very beginning, I felt that there was something between us, and we talked while she took care of me. I found her an amazing listener and a person who was wise beyond her years. She was a year or so older than me, but she had never been married and was never close to it. She told me that she had several boyfriends, but none of them made her heart flutter. Then she smiled her megawatt smile and winked at me. While I was in the hospital, I met with the police several times, and it became quite clear that I was attacked on the orders of my ex-wife for reasons that I simply could not understand. She and her friends were arrested and charged with attempted murder. I let her sweat it out until the beginning of next year, and then I met with her to make a deal. If she waives all custody claims, I will try to reduce the charge to aggravated assault. Why should I help you? She snapped. Because I really don't think you want to spend the next 15 years in prison, I said. I'm offering you a choice between 3 or 6 years and the opportunity to see your children sometimes, rather than from 15 to life and never see them again. Don't be as stupid as you were when you rejected my offer to save our marriage. Remember? I wouldn't have paid attention to all the things you've been doing up to that point if you'd done what I asked. If you had quit this job, gone to rehab, taken up counseling seriously, none of this would have happened. But you refused, and where did that get you? You're unemployed, you're still a fool, and now you're about to become a convicted felon. You don't have shit on me, she said. What are you doing? I said, and this time I grinned at her. I'm tired of being Eliza's doormat. You should have heard the story your friends are telling, I said. They say you hired them to beat me up. They're telling the cops that you wanted me dead. They're setting you up, Eliza. and the only chance you have is to make a deal. I saw her shoulders slump. Eventually, she gave up and made a deal with the district attorney, pleading guilty to aggravated assault. She got a sentence of 3 to 6 years, and I finally got rid of her, for all intents and purposes. But it left me financially exhausted and emotionally drained. I was forced to sell my house and move in with my parents with 3 children. My mom was a godsend. She helped take care of the children and tried her best to allay their fears. After being discharged from the hospital, I had to undergo 2 more months of rehabilitation, during which I could not work. I was insured by the company, plus I received compensation for my work, but the Christmas season was approaching, and they needed a store manager. Compared to the fiasco of the previous year, Christmas 1991 was significantly better, and yet it showed me how lonely I was. The woman I thought I loved, the mother of my children, became a sworn enemy and completely ruined her life. Money was tight, so I couldn't do what I wanted for the kids. I was still in pain and sinking into depression because of the way things had been going for the previous 18 months. And then it got even worse. After the first day, the company I worked for put me in front of a choice. I could have taken a manager's position in another state or agreed to be fired. I didn't do either. I submitted my resignation and found a job at a large retail store. It was a significant decline compared to the position of manager, and I earned less than before. In fact, it was like the beginning of a career, but it was an easy job, and the working hours suited me because they allowed me to be at home with the children in the evenings. I rented a small house, and we moved out of my parents' house. It was in a fairly poor neighborhood, and there was nothing so special to call it home. In general, that winter of 1992 was the lowest point in my life. The only good thing about her was that I didn't succumb to the call of alcohol. After I saw Elise self-destruct, I knew it was better not to go that way, but I'd be lying if I said I'd never been tempted. Then the angel crossed my path a second time. It was Saturday. I was at the grocery store with the kids, and they were out of sorts. By that time, they were 8, 6, and 5 years old, and although they were good children, they were still children. I was messing with Robert, who was really behaving inappropriately, when I heard a voice behind me. Steve? Steve Moreland? I heard. I turned around and saw Grace coming up to us. We hugged each other with greeting signs, and then she got down and greeted all 3 children by name. I was amazed. She had only met them once or twice, and yet she knew their names and how old they were. That was the first time I saw how talented she was in communicating with children, because they immediately calmed down. We chatted, and she seemed very concerned about how I was doing. Then we looked up at the same time, and our eyes met. It was only for a moment, but I think that's when we realized that the spark was there. Listen, do you want to go out to dinner sometime? I said hesitantly. Damn, I owe you for all the care you took of me when I was in the hospital. Steve, I was just doing my job, Grace said. But I have to say that it was very pleasant, and I would love to go on a date with you. Do you have any plans for the evening? I just stared at her. Later, when I got to know her better, I realized that this was her way. She is very straightforward and knows how to get down to business without getting into idle chatter. Anyway, we exchanged phone numbers, then she kissed me on the cheek. It was nothing, really, but I got goosebumps all over my body, and my baby Allison caught it right away. When we finished shopping, she started chatting. Is she going to be our new mom? She asked me. Oh, I don't know, honey, I replied. It's too early to talk about it. Why did you ask? Would you like her to be your new mom? Oh, yes, she said happily. What about you guys? I asked Mary and Robert. Do you think you can accept Miss Grace as your new mom? Of course, Dad, Robert said. She's pretty cute. Then we'll see, I laughed. But it's awfully early to think about it now, and she might have something to say about it. But you like her, don't you, Dad? Mary said in her typical quiet, introspective voice. Yes, I like it, I said. But as I said, we have a long way to go before we get to that. That evening, I took Grace to a steakhouse, nothing fancy, but a place with a good atmosphere and good food. And I found out that she was everything that Eliza wasn't. I can't say that she's perfect, because she also has moments, but I've never met anyone with a sunnier mood. I've never been around a person who looks at life so positively. With Eliza, doom and gloom were constant companions, and she spent endless amounts of energy worrying about things she couldn't control, things that had already passed and been done. She was so full of regret and remorse that it always pulled me down. With Grace, every day is a new opportunity. She is a forward-looking, planning, well-organized person, and she never spends a minute worrying about the past. As soon as the day is over, she leaves him in the past and remembers him only if absolutely necessary. It wasn't long before we realized that we quickly fell in love with each other. After we had been dating for about 6 weeks, I took her to meet my family, and they were very impressed. My father looked at her and told me to do whatever it took to keep her. The children, of course, fell in love with Grace almost as quickly as I did, and she immediately entered the role of foster mother. As the summer went on, we began a relationship, but we both took our time with love, at least not with a full-fledged one. After the experience with Eliza, I was afraid to commit myself to a woman, afraid to give free rein to my feelings. And she was just not the type to make casual love. When I make love to you, I want it to be a bond of love, she told me one evening when we were sitting on the couch in my house after she came to dinner with me, as she had been for several months. It was the middle of November, and we started talking vaguely about living together. I love you, Steve, but I don't want you to do this until you're ready, until we're both ready for it to be a long-term commitment, she continued. I gave my virginity a long time ago, in college, to a guy I thought I was in love with, and he broke my heart. Since then, I've been waiting for the right man. I think you're the man. But until you are ready to take this last step, to walk in faith with me, this will not happen. God, Grace, I really want you so much. But you have no idea how good it feels to hear you say that, I said. Soon, my love, she whispered, and then kissed me slowly and deeply. A week or so later, I went to my mother and told her that I was going to ask Grace to marry me, and she did something she had never done for Eliza, I suppose because of the forced nature of our marriage. She went to her bedroom, to the jewelry box, and took out her old wedding ring. She handed it to me with tears in her eyes. Give it to her with my blessing, she said. It's not a big, fantastic diamond. It's just a small stone in an ordinary setting. But I have a feeling that it will mean a lot more to her than some shiny new trinket that will cost you a tidy sum. There is a lot of love in this ring, and I want her to have it. She's the best thing that's ever happened to you, and I want her to know that. I decided to wait until Christmas Eve to propose to her. I have already decided that we will meet Santa Claus at my parents' house, where they will have their own things with cousins, grandparents. Besides, I wanted to be alone with Grace that night. I picked her up from the hospital after work, and then went to my family to take the children to the Christmas service at the church where Grace had been a parishioner for a long time and where I started going. Grace sang in the choir, and I looked lovingly into her eyes as they sang. Later, we managed to put the children to bed. It wasn't easy, and arranged Santa's gifts. When everything was ready, I told my family that we were returning to my house and winked at my mother, non-verbally informing her of my plans. I turned on the garland on the Christmas tree and put some festive tunes on the stereo, then we sat down on the sofa together, and I took the box out from where I hid it in the pillows. Grace, I have a special Christmas present for you, and I want you to open it now, I said softly. I handed her the box, and when she opened it, her eyes widened and her mouth opened in delighted surprise. Grace, will you marry me? I said, please. In response, she showered me with kisses. Our time has come. God, I've wanted this for so long, she whispered. Love me, Steve, please. Trust me, I've wanted this for just as long, I said. For a very long time. She stood up, reached for her back, and unbuttoned her bra. To be honest, she doesn't need a bra, but she wears it anyway for modesty's sake. After Eliza, it was a refreshing change. But Grace was going to show me that she had a carnal side. She stood in front of me, swaying seductively as she took off her trousers. Then she came out of the black pile of material on the floor. I was reveling in the sight of her when she reached out to me and lifted me off the couch. Slowly, Grace unbuttoned my shirt, tossed it aside, and pulled the t-shirt over my head. Her fingers gently traced lines and circles across my chest, and I felt lust throbbing in my groin. Let's move this to the bedroom, I whispered in a hoarse voice. Come on, Grace said, and at the same time, she gave me that mysterious smile that just drives me crazy. Oh my God. Steve, gasped Grace. God. She moaned as I worked my mouth like a demon over her steaming sweet box. Then Grace couldn't hold the connection between our mouths anymore. She had to throw her head back and gasp with lust and utter gratitude for what we were giving each other. It wasn't just love. I wish I could say it lasted forever. In fact, it probably only lasted 5 minutes, maybe a little more. But in those 5 minutes, Grace and I sealed our love once and for all. We waited for the absolutely right moment until we realized without a shadow of a doubt that we were made for each other. And when we finally consummated our love, it was absolutely perfect. You. Are you ready? I asked. Yes. Yes. Grace squealed. Give it to me. Give me all your love. Merry Christmas, my love, she whispered. Merry Christmas, my love, I replied in response. Grace and I got married in our church in the middle of March and have been enjoying family happiness for almost 14 years now. My children soon became her children, at least at first in her heart, and they rushed to their new mother like ducks to water. Since then, there have been only two dark clouds in our life together. One of them is that Grace couldn't give birth to my own child. We tried like hell and finally found out that she had problems with her uterus. As a rule, Grace never focused on her unhappiness and focused on helping me raise our children. The second happened after we had been married for about 6 years. Out of the blue, Eliza called me and told me that she had contracted HIV a few years ago and was now dying of AIDS. I was afraid of this visit, but, strangely enough, Eliza reconciled with herself and with me. She no longer blamed me for all the bad things that had happened to her in her entire life. She forgave me for the mistakes I made during our marriage, and I forgave her for the hell she put me through during our divorce. After meeting with the children, she asked to talk to Grace alone, and when Grace left her, Grace was in tears. Later, when we were driving home, she told me a little of what they were talking about. She told me not to let you go, she said. She said that the worst mistake in her life was that she did not listen to you when you offered to overlook her misdeeds and save your marriage. You gave her a chance, and she knows she missed it by turning her back on you. I think that's why she was so bitter about the divorce. The last thing Eliza did before she died was to give Grace's consent to adopt the children. She resisted it all the hard, bitter years after the divorce, but in the end, she did the right thing and gave the love of my life the opportunity to truly become a mother. With Grace by my side, I quickly returned to management and climbed the corporate office ladder. I am the regional director of the company I work for, and I am doing well. Grace is still a nurse, working in pediatrics, where her special abilities are most in demand. Sometimes the cases she deals with break her heart, and others infuriate her. She has a short temper, although she hides it well. Mary liked her stepmother so much that she decided to follow in her footsteps and make a career as a nurse. Robert is still in college and joined the National Guard right after graduating from high school. I worry that the longer the war in Iraq drags on, the more likely he will be drafted into the army, but this is his choice and I support him to the end. Allison is in college, intending to become a teacher. I have a great life, but I don't think I would have had it if Grace hadn't appeared in it. Santa Claus has already prepared everything, and Grace is sitting on the couch next to me, curled up in my arms. Bing Crosby hums White Christmas softly from the stereo, and we watch the fire slowly burn as I take a last sip from my glass and set it on the coffee table. Tomorrow there will be laughter and excitement when my family shares the gifts we have prepared for each other. We will open the packages, wondering how each gift is thought out, and then we will gather in the kitchen to prepare a festive treat. It will be a joyful time, as always. But today, in the silence of Christmas night, I am enjoying the greatest gift I have ever received, the one that continues to give. Tonight, I bask in the soft glow of the love and devotion of a good woman, as well as the corresponding love and devotion that I have been able to show her over time. Grace is one word that means both elegance, grace, and an undeserved gift from God, grace. And this is certainly what my Grace means to me.